What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors gets blindsided by a morning show host with a hidden agenda? What you're about to hear will completely change how you see daytime television and the people who control it. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is about power, manipulation, and what happens when someone finally says, "Enough is enough." Make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story gets absolutely wild. The Good Morning America studio was buzzing with its usual pre-show energy when Hugh Jackman walked through those familiar glass doors. He'd been on the show dozens of times over the years, promoting everything from X-Men movies to Broadway shows. Always the consummate professional, always charming, always gracious. The crew loved him, the producers respected him, and the audience adored him. But today was different. Today George Stephanopoulos had something else in mind. As Hugh settled into the interview chair, adjusting his suit jacket and checking his mic, he noticed something odd about George's demeanor. The usual warm smile was there, but it didn't reach his eyes. There was a tension in the air that Hugh couldn't quite place, like the calm before a storm that you feel in your bones, but can't see coming. "Hugh, great to have you back," George said, shuffling through his notes with an almost theatrical precision. "Always a pleasure to sit down with you." "Thanks for having me, George. Always love being here with the Good Morning America family." The cameras rolled, and for the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. They talked about Hugh's latest project, his family, the usual softball questions that morning television thrives on. He was relaxed, engaging, giving the kind of answers that producers dream of. But then something shifted. "You know, Hugh," George said, leaning forward slightly, his tone becoming more serious. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you about. Something that's been circulating in certain circles." Hugh's eyebrows raised slightly. This wasn't in the pre-interview notes. "Oh, what's that?" George's smile became predatory. "There are some people saying that your recent advocacy work, particularly around social causes, might be more about image rehabilitation than genuine concern. Some might call it performative activism." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Hugh's expression didn't change immediately, but those who knew him well would have recognized the slight tightening around his eyes. The way his jaw set, just a fraction more firmly. "I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at, George," Hugh said carefully. "Are you suggesting that my work with various charities and causes isn't genuine?" "I'm not suggesting anything," George replied with the kind of false innocence that politicians perfect. "I'm simply asking what you'd say to critics who question whether these efforts are more about maintaining a certain public image rather than actual commitment to change." Hugh leaned back slightly, and for a moment, the studio felt like it was holding its breath. The crew members who had worked with Hugh for years knew this wasn't the man they'd come to respect. This was an ambush, plain and simple. "George, I have to say I'm a bit surprised by this line of questioning," Hugh said, his voice still controlled, but with an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "We've known each other for years. You know my work. You know my commitment. Why are you choosing to frame it this way?" "I'm just doing my job, Hugh. Asking the tough questions that our viewers want answered." "Your viewers?" Hugh's voice carried a note of disbelief. "Or is this about something else entirely? Because this feels less like journalism and more like a personal attack." George's mask slipped just slightly, revealing something calculating underneath. "I think you're being a bit dramatic, don't you? It's a simple question about public perception." "There's nothing simple about what you're doing right now," Hugh shot back, his composure finally beginning to crack. "You invited me here under false pretenses, set up what was supposed to be a friendly interview, and now you're trying to ambush me with loaded questions based on unnamed sources and vague accusations." The tension in the studio was palpable now. Camera operators were glancing at each other. Producers were scrambling behind the scenes, and George was clearly enjoying the chaos he'd created. "I think you're overreacting," George said with a condescending smile that made Hugh's blood boil. "This is how interviews work. We ask questions, you answer them. It's not personal." "Not personal?" Hugh's voice rose slightly, though he was still fighting to maintain some semblance of professional decorum. "You just question my integrity, my motivations, and my character on national television based on nothing more than gossip and rumor. How is that not personal?" George leaned back in his chair with the smugness of someone who thought he was winning a game that only he knew he was playing. "Hugh, I think you need to calm down. We're just having a conversation here. Calm down. Hugh's voice carried a dangerous edge now. You ambush me on live television, attack my character with baseless accusations, and then tell me to calm down. What exactly is your endgame here, George? My endgame is getting to the truth, George replied, his tone dripping with false righteousness. Something I thought you'd appreciate, given your public stance on honesty and integrity. Hugh shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. The truth? You want to talk about truth? Let's talk about the truth of what's happening right here, right now. You've turned what was supposed to be a promotional interview into some kind of gotcha journalism hit piece. I'm sorry you feel that way, George said, not looking sorry at all. But these are legitimate questions about public figures and their motivations. Surely, someone of your stature can handle a little scrutiny. A little scrutiny? Hugh's eyes flashed with anger. George, you're not scrutinizing anything. You're manufacturing controversy where none exists. You're taking my years of charitable work, my genuine efforts to make a difference, and you're twisting them into something sinister for what? Ratings, personal satisfaction. George's expression hardened. I think you're being paranoid, Hugh. Maybe the reason you're getting so defensive is because there's some truth to what these critics are saying. That was the breaking point. Hugh's professional mask finally cracked completely. Paranoid? You think I'm paranoid? George, I've been in this business for over 2 decades. I know the difference between legitimate journalism and a hatchet job. This isn't about asking tough questions. This is about you trying to tear down someone's reputation for sport. Now, you're just being ridiculous, George shot back, his own composure starting to slip. If you can't handle basic questions about your public persona, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews. Basic questions? Hugh's voice rose another notch. You call questioning my fundamental character and integrity basic questions? You call suggesting that my charity work is fake? Basic questions? What's basic about any of this? The crew was now openly staring. This wasn't just an uncomfortable interview anymore. This was a full-blown confrontation between 2 public figures, and everyone in the studio knew they were witnessing something unprecedented. George, sensing he was losing control of the narrative he tried to create, doubled down. Look, Hugh, I understand you're upset, but this is how journalism works. We don't just lob softball questions at celebrities and let them promote their projects without any real substance. Real substance? Hugh stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. You want real substance? Let's talk about real substance. Let's talk about how you've turned morning television into a platform for personal vendettas. Let's talk about how you use your position to attack people who can't defend themselves properly because they're trapped in your studio, on your show by your rules. Sit down, Hugh, George commanded, his mask finally dropping completely to reveal the controlling personality underneath. You're making a scene. I'm making a scene? Hugh's laugh was harsh and humorless. George, you created this scene the moment you decided to turn this interview into an ambush. Don't you dare try to pin this on me now. You're being completely unprofessional, George snapped, his carefully maintained television persona crumbling. This is my show and you're a guest here. You don't get to dictate how I conduct my interviews. Your show? Hugh shook his head in disbelief. This isn't your personal kingdom, George. This is supposed to be a news program, not your personal platform for character assassination. George's eyes narrowed dangerously. I think you need to remember who you're talking to. I've been doing this a lot longer than you've been acting. And I've taken down people a lot more important than you. The threat was barely veiled, and everyone in the studio felt it. Hugh stared at George for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was deadly. Quiet. Are you threatening me, George? On your own show, in front of all these witnesses. Ah, you actually threatening me? I'm not threatening anyone, George backpedaled quickly, realizing he'd overplayed his hand. I'm simply stating facts about my experience in journalism. No, you're not, Hugh said firmly. You just revealed exactly what this is really about. This isn't journalism, George. This is about power. This is about you trying to remind me, and everyone watching, that you think you're untouchable, that you can destroy anyone you want whenever you want. That's ridiculous, George protested. But his voice lacked conviction now. Is it? Hugh challenged. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you invited me here, specifically to humiliate me on national television. It looks like you had this whole thing planned. Out down to the loaded questions and the condescending responses. George's silence was telling. The studio had gone completely quiet, except for the hum of the cameras that were still rolling, capturing every moment of this unprecedented breakdown. You know what the real tragedy is here, George? Hugh continued, his voice heavy with disappointment. I actually respected you once. I thought you were one of the good ones, someone who used their platform responsibly. But this shows me exactly who you really are underneath all that polished professionalism. George's face had turned a shade of red that would have been comical under different circumstances. The calculated composure he'd maintained for decades of television was completely gone, replaced by something ugly and vindictive. You don't know what you're talking about, George hissed, his voice low and dangerous. You think because you play superheroes in movies, that makes you some kind of real hero? You're just another actor with an inflated ego who can't handle real questions. Hugh's eyes widened in disbelief. Real questions? George, you haven't asked me a single real question this entire time. Everything you've thrown at me has been loaded with malicious intent. You're not a journalist right now. You're a bully with a platform. A bully? George's voice cracked slightly. I'm doing my job. I'm holding public figures accountable for their actions and their claims. No, you're not, Hugh shot back immediately. You're attacking people for your own entertainment and the entertainment of people who get off on watching someone get torn down. There's a difference between accountability and what you're doing right now. The producers behind the cameras were frantically signaling, trying to get George's attention, trying to get him to wrap this up before it got even more out of hand. But George was too far gone, too invested in this power struggle to back down now. You know what your real problem is, Hugh? George leaned forward aggressively. You can't handle being challenged. You're so used to everyone kissing your feet and telling you how wonderful you are that the moment someone asks you a tough question, you fall apart. A tough question? Hugh's voice rose to match George's energy. You call manufacturing controversy out of thin air a tough question? You call attacking someone's character based on unnamed sources and vague accusations a tough question? That's not journalism, George. That's tabloid garbage. Don't lecture me about journalism, George snapped. I was covering real news when you were still auditioning for soap operas. The personal attack hung in the air like a slap. Hugh stared at George for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was ice cold. There it is, Hugh said quietly. There's the real George Stephanopoulos. Not the polished news anchor, not the serious journalist, just a petty man who uses his position to belittle people because it makes him feel important. You're out of line, George warned, but his voice was shaking now. I'm out of line? Hugh laughed bitterly. George, you crossed every line there was to cross. The moment you decided to turn this interview into a personal attack, you ambushed me. You questioned my integrity. You threatened my career. And now you're making personal attacks about my past. And I'm out of line. George stood up abruptly, trying to regain some sense of control. This interview is over. I think you need to leave. Oh, now you want to end it? Hugh's voice dripped with sarcasm. Now that you've revealed exactly who you are, now that you've shown everyone watching what kind of person really sits behind that desk, now you want to pull the plug. Security, George called out, his voice cracking with desperation. Hugh shook his head in disgust. You're calling security? On what grounds, George? Because I defended myself against your attacks? Because I refused to sit here and let you destroy my reputation for your own sick entertainment? You're being disruptive and aggressive, George stammered, grasping for any justification. I'm being disruptive? Hugh's voice rose again. George, you disrupted this entire interview the moment you decided to ambush me with loaded questions. You disrupted any sense of professionalism when you started making personal threats. You disrupted your own show when you revealed that you're more interested in tearing people down than actually informing your audience. 2 security guards appeared at the edge of the set, looking uncomfortable and uncertain. They clearly didn't want to be part of whatever this had become. Gentlemen, Hugh addressed the security guards directly. I'm happy to leave. In fact, I insist on leaving. I refuse to be part of whatever this show has become under this man's leadership. George's face contorted with rage. You can't just walk away from this, Hugh. You can't just storm off because you don't like the questions. Hugh turned back to face George one final time. His expression a mixture of disappointment and disgust. "Watch me, George. And while you're watching, maybe take a long hard look at what you've become. Because this isn't journalism. This isn't entertainment. This is just sad. You're making a huge mistake," George called out as Hugh started to walk away. "Do you have any idea who I am? Do you know what I can do to your career?" Hugh stopped dead in his tracks and slowly turned around. The entire studio was silent except for the hum of the cameras, still capturing every word. "Are you seriously threatening me again?" Hugh asked, his voice deadly quiet. "On live television, in front of all these witnesses, you're threatening my career because I won't sit here and let you attack me." George realized his mistake immediately, but it was too late. The words were out there, recorded forever. "I didn't threaten anyone," George said. "But everyone had heard what they'd heard. Everyone in the studio heard exactly what you said, George. Everyone watching at home heard exactly what you said. You just threatened to destroy my career because I wouldn't play along with your sick little game." Hugh looked around the studio, making eye contact with crew, members who had worked with him for years, people who knew his character and his professionalism. Hugh then turned back to George, his voice resonating with a quiet power that filled the studio. "You know, George, for someone who claims to be about truth and accountability, you're remarkably good at running from it. But the truth has a way of catching up. And today, it caught up with you." With that, Hugh Jackman turned and walked off the set, leaving a stunned George Stephanopoulos and a silent studio in his wake. The cameras continued to roll, capturing the aftermath of an interview that would forever change the landscape of morning television. It was a moment that proved even the most polished facades can crack under the weight of truth, and that sometimes the real heroes aren't the ones on screen, but the ones who refuse to play along with the game. What do you think about this explosive confrontation? Was George Stephanopoulos out of line? Or was Hugh Jackman's reaction justified? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more unfiltered celebrity interviews and deep dives into Hollywood drama, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't miss our next video.